Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of the TRB In-Lap Podcast, which I'm very happy to announce is presented to you by Racing Edge. Yes, we're only 3 episodes in and we've got a partner on board, so huge shout out to Racing Edge. I'm sure if you've been following the racing blog for a little while now, you would have seen their posts shared on my story. You would have even seen them in the comments getting involved in the latest news stories and all the wonderful things around sports car racing. So huge shout out to Racing Edge. And of course, I am joined once again by TRB annual calendar purchaser Michael Haffenden, who is with me today, and we're going to be discussing the recent events of the rather controversial, in some ways, shapes and forms, 6 hours of Spa-Francorchamps, which kicked off the WEC season. Michael, how are you doing? Brief comment on the race. Welcome to episode number 3.
Hello, my friend. It's nice to be back, especially after the WEC season has just kicked off. So, yeah, happy to be here, and thanks for having me along again. And thanks, as you say, to Racing Edge. It's absolutely great news. So let's get cracking on.
At least there's someone out there who likes listening to us ramble on about sports cars. That's what I'm taking away from this.
The grand total is now one person.
It's one, so yeah.
It's a start. You've got to start somewhere. No, comment on the race. I think the prologue was probably more controversial than the race itself, but plenty to talk about. So I'll let you lead the way with that, my friend.
Sure thing. Well, before we dive in, Haff and I were having a chat whilst the race was on about what cars we would like to drive around the Spa-Francorchamps circuit. We were discussing, these race cars look good, but beyond the WEC category lineup, there's definitely some machines we'd like to drive around. Now, we went away, and actually the best place to look was on the Racing Edge website because they have a lot of cars for sale. We decided to go through there and see which particular car in the paddock we'd pick up and take for a lap of the iconic Ardennes circuit. I'll go first. I picked what is a 2019 Radical Sr3 Rs X, and now if you can see the livery on this, it's a little bit Pescarolo-esque, which a lot of you will know I have a soft spot for Pescarolo. Pretty punchy little prototype indeed. And we were chatting about how if you want to get started somewhere in trying to take Eau Rouge flat, a car with a little bit of downforce like a Radical was probably the best place to start. And I think that if I was to, I'm going to embarrass myself if I'm at the wheel of a GTE car or a P2 or the new Hypercars. So maybe a little prototype like this, which I'm sure you experience all the thrills and spills of racing inside, but might be the best place to start for the rookie that is Tim Fullbrook taking to the Spa-Francorchamps circuit for the first time. Half your pick?
I had a browse earlier on today as well, and actually very, very tricky to make a concrete decision on this one because we're choosing a car to take around one of the greatest circuits in the world, undeniably. And also the absolute mixture of cars on that website is incredible, really.
It's insane, isn't it?
The range of cars you could get on there. So a tricky decision, but I did narrow it down to the 2017 BMW M6 Gt3, which they've got listed on there, which I know might surprise you a little bit because, as you well know, the predecessor to that car, the Z4 Gt3, has and probably always will be my favourite racing car of all time, mainly because of the noise it made, which the M6 doesn't quite live up to in many ways, but it has definitely grown on me over the last few years. So I'm going to go with this one. And around Spa, it's won the 24-hour race there twice in 2016 and 2018, I think. So definitely got a proven track record there and would be a mega car to take for a lap round.
Definitely. Well, those are my picks and Half's picks. If you want to have a look, or indeed, if you're in the market for a race or track car, then please head over to racingedge.com. A quick shout out as well to everyone who listened to our second episode, which covered the Sebring 12 hours. Great to hear so many of you enjoying the podcast and leaving comments and likes and shares and telling me my voice sounds funny or whatever it is you guys do once you finish listening. And
listening to two people talk about a race which they both fell asleep watching. So.
Exactly. Amazed.
It's quite incredible.
Amazed we haven't been called out on that more.
I know.
Everyone's way too nice.
We'll
delete this. But anyway, let's get started. 6 hours of Spa. first race of a slightly delayed WEC season, or WEC, whichever you want to call it, back in action. Headline news is obviously the new hypercar class, but plenty of stories to dive through. We're going to go category by category, and I feel like we should just start at the bottom of the ladder and work our way up, because I think we're going to need some time to prepare everyone for the heavy commentary that will come at the end of this. So let's start with Gte Am. Personally, again, the Gte Am field providing a really interesting racing. As always, I say this before, I've said it again, and I'll say it a million times after this, but mixture of AM and pro drivers in race cars just seems to give us great racing action. And one particular, I say AM, you can't see this obviously, listeners, but I am doing inverted commas for AM. Driver I want to shine the spotlight on massively is Ben Keating, driving in the number 33 TF Sport car, taking the start in the Aston Martin Vantage, obviously taking pole in category as well, more than holding his own in the opening stint of a brand new season. Bear in mind, he hasn't had a go in the GTE beside the Prologue. Yes, he's driven Aston Martin Gt3, GTD, in the Rolex 24 earlier this year. But pretty impressive stuff from the American. And he's walking that fine line now between no longer being a gentleman driver and everyone thinking that he's just a race driver. But I just wanted to kick off this category with that comment, because really outperforming himself once again.
Yeah, I think we're running the risk a little bit, aren't we, on only episode 3 of the TRB In-Lap Podcast, of becoming a bit of a Ben Keating fan club. Nice little two-piece for Ben Keating fans. So feel free to join at home, listeners. We'll start a Facebook group or whatever if anyone still uses that platform. But yeah, we've been mega impressed with him so far this season. Obviously doing double driving duties at Daytona in a P2 and then in the GT Aston Martin as well. And yeah, he did amazingly in the race. Like you said, that car started from pole, and I guess they'd had dramas even before the start of the race with the big shunt that they had earlier in the week at the Prologue, which is one of many GT accidents that we saw happen there across the 2 days of testing. So not a very straightforward week, especially for the AM categories, and we had a few non-starters as well. And even the Gulf Racing Porsche dropping it on the way to the grid, unfortunately. So yeah, it was a dramatic one, and I think the temperatures at Spa didn't help that this weekend. And finding the balance of the AMs, trying to bring the tyres up to temperature, but also not really knowing the limit or when to push too much. But yeah, Ben did an amazing job. We saw some really standout performances, I think, in GT on the weekend. We obviously had the Dempsey Proton car and the D station at Aston starting right from the back of the field and just sweeping their way through. I think it was Matt Campbell and
Tomo
Fuji in the D station car. And they made amazing progress early on, and then sort of stumbled up to the back of Ben because they caught him, and passing him is another thing. I know we're going to do the Murray Walker quote, but
props to Ben for not rolling over
massively.
when Graham Goodwin put this rightfully so. Matt Campbell is a Porsche factory driver. He is as factory as they come, and he's a young gun as well. So he's still out there proving that Porsche signing his contract is the right thing to do, and to be making Keating, Keating on the inside into La Source, pushing Campbell out a bit wide, running him out of road just slightly. You'd love to see it, because half an hour, 40 minutes into a new season, and Ben Keating's like, you're the pro drivers, mate. I'm just quick enough and just getting in your way, kind of thing. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, it was great to see, wasn't it? And he really did keep them at bay for quite a few laps. And then it seemed that Campbell got through, and I think Fuji got passed on later in the same lap at Bruxelles. But he'd done an amazing job up to that point. He was well into his first stint at that point. So, and also don't forget, he did an amazing job of not writing off the car again when 2 Lmp2 cars came flashing by. And I think it was Montoya and Rusinoff who ended up having contact. I think Montoya got a drive-through for that in the end. But Keating was sort of the innocent bystander who'd, in some ways, had caused it to happen, because the G-Drive car had been balked a little bit through Speaker's corner and allowed the Dragon Speed car to get a run. But at the same time, there's nothing Ben can do about that. You're going to hold up faster prototypes if you're in a GTE car. So he just did very, very well to react. In some ways, maybe it was out of his hands as well, but coming into Pujon, it's not an easy sort of place to react to an accident, let alone when you're the one who's being collected. And thankfully there's a lot of runoff on the exit there, because there's not very many places at Spa. I can't remember which commentator said that, but not very many places at that circuit where you can get away with an accident at such high speed. So yeah, props to you, Mr. Keating, once again.
Yes, and I did like how he was saying when he was interviewed in the garage, how although he was going backwards at 120 into the runoff, he was still trying to refire the engine or downshift into first and put the clutch in so he could get ready to pull away again. I love that. But yeah, GTM once again very close. Obviously, it was the number 83 AF Corsa Ferrari winning in class. Francois Perrodo, Nicholas Nielsen, and Alessio Rivera, debutant in the series. You might have seen the fun fact I put out in the post during the week that number 83 car now has not finished outside the top 5 since it joined the series at the start of the 2019-20 season. So that team is working particularly well indeed. Another driver who needs the spotlight shined on him more intensely than ever is Rivera, new to the championship, who was blindingly quick. I don't think I can put enough emphasis on how quick he was, setting a new race record in the category as well, and his first appearance in the car. He was also one of the fastest drivers across GTE, Pro and Am. He was right up there pushing the times of the top dogs. So again, another driver up into a GTE Am spot, proving their value. And I'm excited to see where he'll go. I'm excited to see how much of an influence he can have on that 83's success. Obviously, we know Nicholas Nielsen is a proven hand with that car. Francois Perrodo has been there for donkey's years, it seems. But those two now, with a very quick young gun like Alessio, is going to be exciting stuff. Then second place, obviously, the TF Sport car starting on pole. And then our favourite livery of the WEC season 2021, the Settelar Racing number 47 Ferrari, bagging that podium at the death because of a drive-through penalty for the number 88 Dempsey Proton. But for them, first race with the Ferrari. See, they go from the never going to win Dallara. I hate to say it because I like that car, but the Dallara that was never really going to challenge Oreca 07s anywhere in the world, to now a Ferrari in the GTM category. Lecourt, Serna Giotto and Fuoco, obviously, who's a Ferrari young driver in Formula 2, etc. Great result for them, first time out. And just a feel-good story, I suppose, from the Spa weekend. Yeah,
definitely. Don't need to really bang on about that livery much more because it speaks for itself, doesn't it? It's absolutely stunning. Don't think there's a fan, the WC out there, who's not a fan of how that looks in a Ferrari. It looked great on the Dallara as well, but obviously now it's got a better chance of a good result in class now. And they delivered. They didn't have a straightforward run whatsoever. I mean, I think it was Lecourt in the car when Dall'Anna turned him round at the bus stop, which Dall'Anna then later got a drive-through for. And I think then later that lap, while Roberto was trying to get back up to speed, he had to spin at Les Combes. So they did end up losing a big chunk of time. And yeah, you can say they got the podium because they benefited from another team's penalty. But, a podium's a podium, especially on your WC debut in that category. So yeah, that's a nice feel-good story, as you say.
Strong performances then, and also it's great to see the D-Station Aston Martin as well running strongly. I was very happy to see that car obviously damaged heavily in the prologue. Drivers missing though. A driver that for me, I don't want to say went missing, but I didn't find that there was much gravitas about their race. I want a better word than gravitas, but I'm going to stick with that now because I've said it. And I'm looking really at one of the other Aston Martins, that being the 98 Northwest AMR car. There was a lot of Paul Dall'Anna cutting the track and getting told off by the stewards. But you wouldn't have realised Augusto Farfus was in that car over the race weekend. I didn't feel like he had that impact on the race that we know Augusto can have. Obviously, he was particularly strong at Le Mans, 2020. That was one of the battles of the race, was seeing the TF Sport and AMR GTM advantages going hammer and tongs at it into the night. Charlie Eastwood and Johnny Adam fighting off a very quick Augusto Farfus. But again, just felt like there wasn't that impact there from him. And that Aston, I mean, the Aston was clearly quick. It's not to say that the Aston was slow at Spa or anything like that. I don't know. Just, I don't want to say he went missing, but I feel like that was a performance that I would have expected and maybe didn't get to see. I don't know. I don't know if that's too harsh or whether an Augusto Farfus fanboy is going to fire up in the comments and come at me. But and also as well, performance just want to highlight is the Iron Lynx team, the Iron Dames squad, the number 85 Ferrari of Rahal Frey, Catherine Legg and Michelle Gosner. Great to see that team back. Great to see Catherine Legg back in action. I think that's a storyline we're all happy to see rounded off, with the return to racing in GTM following her crash last year. So some it seemed a fairly calm race in GTM, but some important stories nonetheless to take away from it.
Yeah, definitely. I think in many ways that's kind of a good thing after the number of incidents that we saw in that category throughout the prologue.
Even in qualifying as well.
Yeah, and in qualifying, that was a very bizarre qualifying session. The two Porsches basically having exactly the same incident. One was at least on a flying lap, and the latter was on an out lap from the pit lane after that red flag had been put back in. So, yeah, a bit of a crazy sort of build up to the race for the GTM class, but nice to see some good racing, some clean racing, some less clean racing, but that's to be expected. And I think it bodes well for the rest of the year. I mean, I'm really, really excited to see the GTM battle this year at Le Mans. It just seems to be again, sort of a bit like GTD and IMSA seems to be going from strength to strength, and the sort of teams that we see there and the driver lineups that sort of bolster the AM element to each entry is building up and building up. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this class plays out for the rest of the WEC season, and especially at Le Mans.
Well, particularly as well at Le Mans, we have the Asian Le Mans series and ELMS winning teams joining us. So I'm particularly excited to see those. Particularly Rinaldi Racing is the team I'll just give a quick shout out to, because I reckon they're going to be very much rapid in the Ferrari. But anyway, we'll move on from GTE AM and we'll go up the ladder another step to Gte Pro. And I suppose there's only two words to describe the Gte Pro race. One of them's Kevin and the second one's Estra. And I think that's it, isn't it? I mean, what a race from the 92. What a drive from Kevin Estra to back that pole position in such fashion. I mean, it was ridiculous. That team perfectly run. You wouldn't think that it was only Neil Yarni's second or third time in that car in competition. So again, I mean, your thoughts, Michael, on what must be probably one of the most dominant GTE Pro performances in WEC history.
Yeah, are we sure that Kevin was actually in the GT Pro category, because he seemed to be in a different class to everyone else on the weekend? It was a sublime performance. That qualifying lap, you don't see margins of a second in qualifying in GTE, let alone in GT Pro and the WEC. So that was something else. And I urge listeners to go and watch the onboard of that pole lap, because he has a sizable sideways moment at Pouhon, and it is quite remarkable to watch. He's properly on it. And I remember Yarni was talking about how he's sort of getting up to speed with driving the RSR, and he's had so much prototype success, but is sort of still getting there with the GT car. And he was like, "This is a car which you really have to wring the neck of to get the best lap time out of it, and the best driver to do that at Spa is Kevin Estre." I mean, I think one of the greatest sports car performances I've seen in the last decade was Kevin's first stint at the 2019 Spa 24 Hours in the damp conditions, where he just sort of came from, I think it was 15th, 16th on the grid, to end up leading by the end of his first stint. And it was just one of those things where you're just like, is everyone else set to 90% on their AI difficulty? Because this guy is just like driving past them in places, seems to have the grip. no one else seems to have. And the confidence that he has is just remarkable. I think he's really gaining that Alan McNish reputation that Audi used to have with their battles with Peugeot in the sort of diesel era. And it used to be that Peugeot were like, oh, is Alan starting the car? Because we know he's going to be aggressive. We know he's not going to hold anything back, even at the start of a 24-hour race. And I think Kevin Estre has the exact same reputation to him. If you've got Kevin Estre behind you and you're in a GT car, he's not going to be behind you for very much longer. And yeah, incredible pole lap and incredible first stint. I mean, he was, aside from the Ferrari's lockup into La Source on the opening lap, I don't think he was really challenged.
That's the closest anyone got to that Porsche, wasn't it? Apart from one of the P2s had a particularly tricky time passing him into the bus stop on the opening stint. I think Estre was fairly firm in letting that driver know that he wasn't going to pass him there. I think as much as Kevin Estre's performance was brilliant, and I think what was the true sign of his performance and also his character is that he said, yeah, look, I felt great. The car felt great for me. I felt absolutely on it. Great job by the team, but also great job by Neil. He's aware that Neil Yarni is new to this car. He's aware that the weak link in that squad could potentially be Neil. Not to say that Yarni's going to be a problematic driver, but with someone so new to what are the most advanced GT cars out there, you would expect a mistake here or there from Yarni's stints. And we didn't see that. We barely saw Yarni put a foot wrong. Okay, he might not have matched the outright pace, the stint pace that Estre and maybe Ricard Leitz had in the other cars. But I think that it's a sign of Yarni's potential with this GT team is that he did exactly what he needed to do. Kept the car on the grey stuff, completed his stints boxed, on the pace as much as he could be in his first time out in the car. Tribute to the man who's won Le Mans. I mean, what more do we expect from someone? A great drive from him. And I think he, the headlines are saying Estre's done their best race. And, we're guilty of saying what a fantastic performance. But, two drivers in a team and the second driver, Yarni, did a great job as well.
Yeah, I think Yarni did exactly what he needed to do, really, didn't he? He didn't need to go out and try and match Estre's lap times. He probably wouldn't have been able to, and that's not a criticism, it's just an observation. And he really didn't need to. Like, Estre put the car in a fantastic position and Yarni brought it home trouble-free. So I think it bodes well for him moving forwards in GT machinery. And we obviously know how great of a driver he is. Obviously received a fair bit of criticism for his performances in Formula E, but that's such a difficult barometer of a driver's sort of ability and talent. Formula E, it doesn't really reflect, it can just be so hit and miss, can't it? Obviously the depth of talent in Formula E is incredible, so it might be quite a good barometer in that sense, but the sort of
the nature of racing, isn't it? It's very much, I don't want to say it's punchy, but you're right with the hit and miss. Sometimes you can have the best race weekend ever and seem on it, or you can just find yourself beaten up 3 or 4 race weekends in a row. A good example of that is Andre Lotterer, who is probably one of the fastest sports car drivers in recent ever. And in obviously he was quick in DS Cheetah, and now with Porsche it's not the easiest of time. But yeah, very good point that Yarni's talent, I think, has been overlooked in this interim period, should we call it, between the Porsche LMP1 program and now. And he was at Rebellion, and doing a great job with Rebellion and helping them cause Toyota headaches when there was barely any chance of that car ever taking victory overall. I think he's done a fantastic job. Yeah,
definitely. I think at risk of saying same energy on the TRB In-Lap podcast.
You said it now.
Same energy as Brendan Hartley and his years in Formula One. People who hadn't really heard of him before that, maybe casual Formula One fans, would be like, oh, who is this Brendan Hartley guy? He's not great. He's not that quick. We knew of him as this fantastic sports car driver who's blisteringly fast. And if it doesn't quite come together in whatever category, it doesn't mean that a driver isn't a great driver or their career's a write-off or they become a meme. It's difficult for drivers who sports car drivers in particular, who you could say the same for Lotterer when he had that one-off appearance for Caterham at Spa in 2014. Some fans might be like, oh, he's an Andre Lotterer off the grid, but actually me and you would be like, well, that's very high praise.
Yeah,
because he's a great driver.
I would love to be called the Andre Lotterer off the grid. But the same again, Kamui Kobayashi, another driver we can lump into this list. Turns, great in Formula One with Toyota, and then drives Caterham, and everyone's like, oh, back of the grid, whatever, blah blah blah.
So our point is, watch sports car racing, because you'll discover much better talent, and you'll know that they're good.
Haff is getting the biggest thumbs up he can possibly get from me at the moment. Another story that we had from the Gte Pro event, Corvette racing. Nice to see the bright yellow C8R taking part in WEC competition. The story really around a car that was, again, maybe the bop game needs to be played out a bit. Maybe it didn't really have the pace. Comments about the colder Spa temperatures. When we say cold, we mean really cold. Like they rolled out for practice on Friday, and it was like 2-3 degrees ambient. That's this. By the way, this Corvette runs in IMSA, where it's Florida, and the air feels like it's 100 degrees. So, like, it's a very different world for that car. So, there were setup struggles. There were issues with maybe that general running temperature. Nice to see that car taking part. Nice to see another Gte Pro entry. The real story is Oliver Gavin, his final endurance race after a career that is longer than you and I are old, really. And that's what's strange to think, is that we haven't been around in a time when Ollie Gavin hasn't been at the wheel of a race car. So it's weird going forwards, because for me personally, watching ALMS as we started to get into sports car racing, always the Brit in the Corvette causing some troubles and absolutely wheeling the bright yellow C6Rs, C5Rs, C7Rs, great. I can't find the words to describe just how good Ollie Gavin is, but nice to see him racing in WEC for one final time, and the final time in his career.
Yeah, that was very touching, that interview that he did when he'd stepped out of the car for the final time. You could hear how sort of emotional he was. His voice was shaky a little bit, and struggling a bit to make eye contact with the camera and stuff. You could tell that this is a guy that really lives and breathes motor racing in general, but especially Corvette. He's really part of the Corvette family and has served them so well, as they've served him so well over the years. And he's just a true gentleman, isn't he? I think he's probably, when you're sort of Harry Tinknells or Alex Brundles of the world were coming up and watching sports cars and getting their first races, he was sort of the benchmark of how to, not only how to drive, but how to act. Is very revered and respected throughout the whole paddock and amongst fans alike. So, yeah, really, really sad to see that end of an era, but glad to see that he'll be continuing doing a lot of racing stuff with his driving academy with Corvette. And yeah, what a fantastic driver. I mean, he's had so much success. I think 5-time class winner at Le Mans, Sebring and Petit Le Mans, and has obviously got many titles to his name dating back to GT1 era. And then GT2, and then we obviously saw most recently, I think his last Le Mans win was 2015, which was a fantastic race. Great driver and even better guy, even though I've never met him, but you can just tell he's going to be one of those guys that you sit down and chat to and get on like a house on fire, because he's just so personable and such a gent.
I know that at some point in the next 15, 20 years, you and I will be rumbling around a paddock somewhere, going, oh, this is an old C7R. We used to really love these cars. And there'll be an Ollie Gavin lurking around, and he'll be the kind of person to say, yeah, let me show you this, let me show you that. I know it. So, yeah, from everyone at TRB, we won't do it now because this will just cause everyone a headache who's listening with headphones. But a round of applause for Ollie Gavin and his career. Great to see him rounding it off. Shame that car couldn't get to the podium. It was very close indeed with the drive-through penalty for the 52 AF Corsa Ferrari. Right at the death, right in the final half an hour, it looked like the Corvette might have just got onto the podium. And Antonio Garcia, who was driving in the number 63 as well, said he was giving it absolutely everything just so Ollie could be on the podium one final time. And I think that sums it up rather nicely.
That would have been a fantastic story, wouldn't it, if they'd got that podium? They struggled, didn't they? Really, like you said, with the temperatures. They seemed to be there or thereabouts in the first stint. They jumped the 91 Porsche at the first stop, and then got muscled back out the way at Speaker's Corner. Just a very tricky sort of, I think that's the European debut for the C8R, isn't it? So not a great start to their sort of European campaign side of things, but I'm sure we'll see that car come on strong, and we know how much of a factor Corvette are at Le Mans. And I just think it's one of those things where BOP comes into play, and also this is extremely different conditions to what they've been running it in, where they've been sort of running away with it in GTLM and IMSA. And also, last thing on the Ollie Gavin tribute, he has changed the way we view Le Mans forever because of a certain green horse on the Mulsanne Straight. Would you like to sort of delve into that story? I think it's from the Le Mans test day, wasn't it, where he was on a Radio Le Mans interview, but we can't unsee that green horse now. So Ollie, if you're listening, thank you for that.
So to describe this random animal that's crept its way into the TRB In-Lap podcast, Ollie Gavin was on the Radio Le Mans test day coverage. Must have been, I'm struggling to remember when this actually was, but it was in the last 2 years anyway. And they were chatting about how Le Mans unique. You set the car up for straight line speed. It doesn't matter how many times you've been to Road America or you've been testing wherever around the world on the high banks of Daytona, whatever. When you get to Le Mans, you need to sort out your car's straight line speed, and you need to trim that thing out and change the gearing, blah, blah, blah. And Ollie Gavin was talking about how when in previous races, when they didn't necessarily have the same timing and data technology that they have now, they would use markers on the track to work out how quick they were going and whether the setup change had helped them find speed. And Gavin described this bright green horse on the side of the track on the run down from Tête Rouge down towards the first chicane. And I thought, I can't quite believe this. What's he on about, a big green horse? Even John Hindhaugh, who was in the commentary booth with him at the time, was very much confused at this bright green horse. Lo and behold, go on Google Earth and Google Maps or whatever online map provider suits your fancy, and take a trip down on Street View, just starting the run up towards the first chicane before the restaurant Les Ordres d'Hier, or whatever the French is, on the left, the iconic building. On the right hand side, there's a bright green horse on a plinth. And Ollie Gavin used to use that. And I say Ollie Gavin, the rest of the Corvette drivers used to use that as their point of reference. Oh, there's a green horse. Look back down at the speedo or revs or whatever. Feed back to the engineers. So we can't now ever do a lap of Le Mans without referencing the green horse.
The ascended speed trap, that is basically.
Yeah. Who needs Al Kamel timing systems, but who needs it when we've got bright green copper horses on the side of the track?
So I apologise for that sort of off topic, but it had to be said. He has changed the way we view probably our favourite stretch of road in all of racing. So that's another impact he's had on us as sports car fans.
Definitely. Any more comments on Gte Pro? Obviously, we saw some interesting characteristics with the cars, one of them being Ferrari's ability to run away from Porsches in a straight line, and also Porsche's ability to pick up right rear punctures. Some interesting characteristics there, one of them obviously more beneficiary than the other. Talking about Ferrari's straight line speed, the next couple of rounds, Portimao, which we know has a very fast front stretch, I don't think it's going to be able to cause too much damage around the rest of the lap. But then we head to Monza on the 18th of July, which is my birthday. Monza on the 18th of July. I don't want to say the bop's been set up so that we get an AF Corsa Ferrari 48812 in Gte Pro at Monza. But Porsche are going to be thinking already that those Ferraris are pretty quick in a straight line.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something that Porsche struggled with at Le Mans last year. I know there was obviously a big BOP change overnight after they got pole as well, but it is maybe an Achilles heel of that car, because you saw that they've definitely got the pace over one lap, and in clear air they've certainly got the pace over the Ferraris. Estre was able to build a sort of 3 or 4 second gap while Leitz was struggling behind the other Ferrari, which I think was Molina after him and Pierre Guidi switched positions on the run up to Les Combes. And then you had the Corvette just behind them. So it was quite nice to see that the cars were all that close still, even sort of half an hour into the first stint. But yeah, Leitz was trying everything to get past Molina, and just it seemed to be that initial acceleration out of the corners. And maybe you can put that down to the Ferrari being turbocharged and the Porsche naturally aspirated in terms of torque out of the corners and stuff. But it did also seem to be at the end of the straights that the Ferraris were just continuing to gap the Porsches just enough to cause them a headache and force them to sort of go a bit different on strategies and taking only left side tyres and things like that, stops to try and jump them. And I think ironically ending up getting jumped by the Corvette when they did that anyway. So yeah, a bit causing the second Porsche a big headache, at least in the opening couple of stints. But yeah, the Ferrari seem to come on good on race pace every time. It's been a sort of a trait of that 488 for a while now, hasn't it? But it's, to be honest, as much as it must frustrate the Porsche drivers, I like to see cars with different characteristics. I like to see that the Porsche might be lighting up the timing screens in the final sector at Le Mans because it's got so much grip through the Porsche curves, or it's leaning on the downforce, whereas the Ferraris are bossing the rest of the lap because they're trimmed out and they've got better straight line speed. I know it's difficult, and achieving BOP on lap time is very different to achieving BOP when you're racing wheel to wheel, because you're going to have different strengths and weaknesses to achieve that lap time. But it's one of those things. Like Porsche clearly had the pace to be up in front and 1-2, so it's up to Ferrari to be causing them a headache, and they definitely did do that. So I think it's quite an interesting battle. All we need now is to see where the Corvette is strong, and then we'll have a great battle on our hands.
I think as well, the whole BOP argument, we hear drivers in the pit lane, Duncan Vincent's there with his microphone. How's your race going? What's going on? First thing, we can't beat them in a straight line. We're slower out the corners. Whatever, there's always a BOP comment. I genuinely feel that across the season, it levels out. You never hear drivers say they've got good BOP. That's a flat out rule. You never hear a driver go, oh yeah, we've clearly got a bit more top end than this car. That never happens. So I think, yes, okay, Porsche are struggling in the straight line sectors. At Spa, it was obvious that Ricard Leitz and Jimmy Bruni were struggling to break the Ferraris like that. But then we go to Portimao, which is a circuit with plenty of corners and where having good lateral grip is pretty much crucial. There's one straight really to properly stretch your legs, if not two. So I think then again across the season, then Monza, right, that's going to lean towards Ferrari, okay. Then we go to Le Mans, it's going to be mixed, okay, probably a Ferrari track. And then rounding off the season, we've got Fuji, where that's exactly half and half, and Bahrain, which is exactly half and half. So you've got to think that this is a thing that's just going to level out, and it's not really an issue. But I completely agree with you. I like seeing cars develop their performance in different ways. Drivers have to make the difference. They know the strengths they've got to play to. They know the car underneath them. Creates great racing. I mean, how many times do we see that when we've, watched other forms of GT racing? We've watched, even Formula One back in, say, 2012 and 2010 kind of era, when the McLarens were particularly reliable. Maybe didn't have the one lap pace, but were reliable and could finish the race distance, and were maybe more quicker in a straight line than the Red Bulls. That produced some fantastic racing. We saw in LMP1 where there were some of the P1s deployed their hybrid out of the corners and were particularly fast in the first part of the straight, and some picked up towards the end, and you had this fight on the boost button. It creates interesting racing, and I wouldn't want to see the cars leveled out in the straight line performance department. I'd want to see them kept slightly different, and I'd want to see the drivers forced to make the decisions that are going to keep them in front or get them in front. I think that's what we want to see from GT drivers. And if you agree with me, then feel free to say, and if you disagree with me, feel free to tell me as well. Listeners, if you've made it to this point, because I like to hear people disagree with me when it comes to BOP, because I am a bit of a BOP fanboy to some extent. So yes, on that note then, let's move on to the next class up the tier, and probably where things are going to get interesting, shall we say. Let's go to the LMP2 class, the second tier As you can tell, I put the emphasis on second. Bit comedic value in that. To start off with, if we were to just separate the Lmp2 race from the issues we're bound to get onto, dominant performance from the 22 United Autosports team, fantastic driving from Felipe Albuquerque, great opening stint by Phil Hansen. Fabio Scherer on his debut did exactly what they needed to do. Again, another stat I'm going to absolutely launch at you, Haff, and the rest of the TRB listeners. The 22 car leading 96.9% of the entire 6 hours. Only a handful of other teams led the other 5 laps. It was 156 of the 161 laps they led. The most of those being G-Drive, who led 2 laps. Look, that team, United go well. They've got this Oreca 07 completely sussed. There's nothing more for them to extract from this car. The drivers are doing what they need to do. Perfect storm, isn't it? Everyone else in LMP2 has got a bit of a headache on their hands.
Yeah, definitely. That first stint by Phil Hansen was extraordinary in my eyes. I mean, to take the lead basically on the exit of La Source, he did very, very briefly from the lead Toyota, and then obviously got passed on the run up to Les Combes after Raidillon. But he managed to stick with the Toyotas and was only a few seconds back in the opening laps, and then obviously managed to keep the Alpine LMP1 grandfathered machine at bay for a number of laps as well, and really caused Negrão a headache. And Alpine were ordering him to turn the engine map up and go more aggressive and really to push and get clear of this guy, which did eventually happen. But, it really took sort of 15, 20 minutes for that to change. And then in that time, I guess Hansen had been trying to keep the Alpine behind and run clear air and stuff, and clearly felt he had the pace because he wasn't blocking the Alpine, but he definitely wasn't making it easy for Negrão behind. And he'd built up a sort of 6 to 7 second gap to Guido van der Garde. And we know how quick van der Garde is starting an LMP2 car from just how quick he was at Spa in the Dallara a few years ago for Racing Team Netherlands. And that was not traditionally a car that we'd seen mixing it in with the Orecas, but it was a really standout performance in my eyes that year. And van der Garde did come back at him before the stops, but then it seemed that United Autosports Oreca just had the legs on high fuel, and there was nothing that van der Garde could do. And obviously van der Garde is wary that he's got an AM to go in, and they're not really too much focusing on the overall P2 battle. But of course, van der Garde would have gone for a move if it was there on the table. So yeah, great stint from Phil Hansen. I think he deserves a real shout out, and is definitely my sort of driver of the category for the weekend, just for that opening stint. But also honourable mention to Felipe Albuquerque, because even just throughout the prologue, you saw how strong that entry was going to be, because Albuquerque was setting times faster than the Hypercars. Although
we'll get onto that later.
I'll leave that for now. But Albuquerque is just an incredible driver, and I've seen a lot of comments as to why isn't he in a hypercar, or why he deserves more kind of thing. I'm sure it's going to come for him, because he's just a fantastic driver and such a safe pair of hands as well. And again, one of the nicest guys in the paddock. So big shout out and honourable mention to him. But I was really, really impressed with Phil Hansen's first stint. I thought that was absolutely mega, and sort of the van der Garde and Hansen were in a class of their own for the opening couple of hours, when we saw a mega scrap behind with some amazing names joining the P2 ranks on the weekend. So to be in a sort of class above some of the names like Brundles and your Freints, that was fantastic to see.
I think it was great as well for the kind of, I don't want to use the phrase character arc. That's the first thing that came to my head. I'm really sorry to say that, but that development of Hansen, obviously he was the youngest overall finisher at Le Mans back in 2017, I believe. He's been around this P2 machinery at a very crucial point in his driver career, and he's very much on top of it now. He has upped the driver ranking thanks to his ELMS title, which he thoroughly deserves, and obviously WEC title as well. He's just a very exciting driver. And this is the thing as well that really stood out to me. is he moved over precisely when it was time to let the Alpine through. He extracted every single second he possibly could by running where he was in that opening stint. He knew the Alpine was there. He knew that, it was the P2 leading a hypercar, and he was probably aware that at some point Andre Negral was going to make a move. But he did everything he needed to do. He kept his eyes facing forward and drove fantastically well. Then let the Alpine through at the source later on, backing up, like you say, the job that Albuquerque did in qualifying. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what the future holds for Phil Hanson. We forget how young he is. He's 21. He is a very much a young driver. He's an F2 driver, if you like, in terms of his age, but in terms of his career, what he's achieved and his ability still to just go out and win and drive at 100% in endurance racing. It's of someone who's 10 years older than him. Really impressed. And I was also impressed by a couple of other performances in LMP2. We obviously had the two Gte cars rounding out the podium. It's nice to see Jota's double-edged sword with the 38 and 28. Nice to see those guys running the two cars and competing strongly as well. Particularly, I was happy to see Ant Davison doing well, because I just like Ant Davison doing well. Sorry about that one, everyone. But the performance in that stood out to me as well with the 28. We did have, obviously, Sean Gelael, Stoffel Van Dorn and Tom Blomqvist sharing that car. And I think that's an interesting car to keep an eye on, because you've got Van Dorn, who has his Mercedes Formula E contract. He's obviously a Mercedes backup reserve driver. Tom Blomqvist, who is GT stuff in the past, now really, I think, starting to find his feet in prototype racing. And Sean Gelael, who never really made the Formula ladder work for him. I think those are three drivers who are, I don't want to say are at a crossroads now, but are at a point where this prototype stuff is their market now. And I think you would say you were a hypercar brand, or you were an LMDH brand, or an LMDH customer, or a hypercar customer, and you saw that Stoffel Van Dorn was looking for a new contract, or you saw that, potentially race winning Tom Blomqvist and Sean Gelael by then are looking for a contract, you're not going to shy away from names like that when it comes to a driver lineup. Impressed by their performances in their opening race.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no shortage of talent for hypercar or LMDH teams to take a pick from, is there, in the current driver market? And a lot of them are also Formula E names, coincidentally. But yeah, we're going to see some fantastic teams competing in this next era, and some even better driver lineup. I mean, if you think about how excited the fans are to see this next era and of the WEC and of sports car and IMSA in general, and how many times the words Le Mans 2023 have been thrown about in the last 6 months or so. Think about how excited the drivers and how itching the drivers must be to be like, yeah, I want to be there and I want to be part of that. The same as we're like, I want to be there and I want to get my ticket now.
Yes.
I know that I'll be there. The drivers will also be like, I want a seat there because I want to be part of that. And even if I'm not competing for the overall win, I want to be at that race and witnessing history being made. So yeah, there's some absolutely quality drivers who are on the market for those, and I can't wait to see what we end up getting, because the caliber of drivers and teams and manufacturers, obviously most importantly, we're going to see in that next era is brilliant.
I feel like these drivers are setting out their stall now to say, yeah, come get me. Robin Freint saying the WRT team, Ferdinand Habsburg, obviously we know their connections to Audi. It's cool to see them saying, yeah, actually, I can do a really good job in a prototype. So if, just in case you're looking for drivers, you might want to give my name a quick search.
Yeah, definitely. And actually what I was about to raise was about WRT. So you've basically done the transition for me. What were your thoughts on their first WEC weekend? Obviously, they had a fantastic debut in ELMS at Barcelona a couple of weeks prior to that. Were you impressed, underwhelmed? What did you make of their performance? Because they did struggle a little bit, didn't they?
I felt overall they didn't have the obviously no one had the pace really to beat United Autosports. I felt like they definitely had top 5 pace, but they had the clutch problem, which obviously dropped them down the order. That's why when you look at the results, they're a lot further down than you'd expect. I felt like it was strong. I felt like it was a good first stab in WEC LMP2 racing for a team that is pretty much down the road from Spa. It's as close as you can get. Excited to see what Robin Freintz will be able to do once he's had some more time behind the wheel of that car. Obviously, Ferdinand Habsburg as well. I think he's a very interesting character and has a lot of potential as well. I think once he's given some stability, because of my recent memory of him in the DTM, he was with Aston Martin. Well, everyone knows how that went. And then he was with Audi for a year, and then Audi pull out of DTM. I feel like now he's got a good shot at let's commit to this and let's see some drivers, really develop. So I think that was a strong performance. Like you say, victory in the LMS 4 Hours of Barcelona. I wouldn't be surprised to see them fighting at the sharp end, because I really think that's a team that are trying to catch the eye of Audi for a potential LMDH car customer plan, but also to just prove that they're a great squad and they do more than just Audi R8 LMSs. So yeah, I think that's definitely a TRB car to watch for the rest of the season to see how that WRT car does. An interesting opening. I mean, for me, the segment of the race that really excited me, I think that probably my favourite part of the race was this stint in the middle part. It was probably that's over the halfway mark, so we're into the final 2 hours, and there was a Gte car, which I think was Antonio Felix da Costa. There was Guido van der Garde, I think, was back in the Racing Team Netherlands machine, the 29, and he had Ferdinand Habsburg, who's obviously brand new to WEC racing, and they were just going hammer and tongs at it and were beating the living daylights out of each other, quite frankly, on the track, racing from pit stop to pit stop. It was a prime example of this current era of endurance racing, which are these sprint stints, aren't they? It's no longer about, let's get the car to the 4 hour mark and see where we are. Let's get the car to the end of the 12 hours. It is between the time your bum hits that seat and you release the pit limiter to the time you get out, you get dragged out by the driver who's next getting in. You have to be giving it absolutely everything. And they even spoke this when the interviewer was there down in the pit lane chatting to Antonio and chatting to Ferdinand post their stints. They were loving it. They were absolutely enthralled by battling each other on track and going at it for an entire stint. You didn't need a better advert for why endurance racing isn't just cars going around in circles for 6+ hours. It was spot on, and it was, again, the strengths of having matching cars. It was a spec race to some extent because they're all in Oracle 07s, but nonetheless, thrilling action indeed.
Yeah, and great to see in the context of the changes that have been made to the P2 category this year. I think everyone's been worried looking at the lap times versus Hypercar, which obviously we'll come on to, as we've said many times before in this podcast. But if the racing's still just as good as it was before, then fine. I'm completely fine with it being a bit slower. Well, that's a lie. It is a shame to see them get slowed down, because watching those cars at Le Mans, and we were there at Le Mans for the introduction of this era of LMP2s in 2017, where they were blisteringly fast and incredibly reliable in searing heat that year, while me and you were melting trackside. The actual only real reliability problems I can remember for that category was at Le Mans last year, bizarrely enough. Like standout sort of electrical issues before the start and things like that, but normally they're pretty bulletproof, aren't they?
Just to stab in, was that the Rebellion car that year that nearly got the overall win as well was fighting with the Jackie Chan DCs, had that starter motor problem. Do you remember this? And they cut a hole in the bodywork so that a mechanic could hit it with a hammer at the pit stops, and then they got excluded for that. But again, the engine wasn't blowing up. The thing wasn't just expiring every race. This was
especially
a minor
the number of LMP2s we've had in the last few years. It could, well, if those cars were unreliable, we'd know about it. And you look back at the sort of predecessors and going back to Lmp6 where it used to be you finish the race, you're on the podium, or if you haven't won already, pretty much. So it's a completely different species of Lmp2, and it's fantastic. And the speeds of them, they're basically rocket ships, and that was fine when Lmp1 was still around, but obviously now it's the changes are necessary with Hypercar being introduced, and it is a shame to see them getting slowed and they're not what they once were. But like you said, that stint of the race where they're all going hammer and tong and no quarter given, and the drivers are getting out the car and having a bit of banter about, oh, what did he say about that? Oh, I wasn't expecting him to go around the outside there. So, he can say what he wants, but having a good bit of banter after a great race, just like they would do after they'd been karting together or something. So, I'm not comparing the Lmp2 category to go-karts. I'm just saying, yes, it's a spec category, and yes, they've been slowed down for this year, and they have changed a lot, and they're running less power, and they're heavier, and they're running the Le Mans Aero at Spa and every other track, but the racing is still great. So that's the main thing.
And also as well, we're not seeing the struggles I would have expected with that aero pack. Obviously, we're hearing that they are struggling with trying to, just come to terms with the lack of grit aerodynamically, but we're not seeing probably the major incidents and spins and hits and crashes and things and dents that I personally was expecting, in the knowledge that these cars were reduced, I suppose, in their pace so significantly. I think I was going to say a kind of don't want to say hidden performance, but a team that did well without people realizing they were doing well is the number 34 Inter Europol competition car. Alex Brundle, of course, driver who I love seeing in P2 action. Renke van der Zande, I suppose being head of the Van der Zande fan club yourself, Half, very excited to see him racing. And,
alongside Brundle as well. You can't make a nicer driver duo in a prototype for me than those two. Fanboying hard.
And Smiatkowski as well, the third driver in that car, finishing the category in fifth, eighth overall. A strong performance again. And I think this is another point of, I don't want to say the stars aligning, but how important these good talent is in sports car racing. I know that sounds stupid, but you get Alex Brundle in a car and you get Renke van der Zande sharing a car, racing for a team that are obviously customers. They have to go and spend the money. They have to go and find sponsorship, and they can get the result for people. It's just I feel excited by seeing Alex Brundle in a car going well, Renke van der Zande in that car going well, and they end up in a good spot. Another team, I think, to watch this season.
Yeah, I hope they have some good results, because it would be great to see that team, their sort of loyalty to endurance racing over the last few years, get rewarded with some proper results, because traditionally we've seen the teams that are running the Ligiers and the Dalaras and LMP2 have really had a tough time of it. You look at sort of Setelar, you look at ARC Bratislava and those sort of entries, and even United Autosports to an extent when they were running the Ligier. Obviously they sort of had the approach of, let's be bulletproof, let's not make any mistakes, and they ended up getting sort of top fives and top tens at Le Mans and stuff, even though despite not being there on one lap pace. But yeah, now that they've switched to the Orica, it does feel like, okay, this is our time to shine, kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, it's not going to be easy, because we've just been banging on about the caliber of drivers and the depth of talent in that class. But yeah, hopefully we get to see them at least on the podium at some point in the season.
So let's take a deep breath. Let's everyone sit back and let's dive into the real meaty bit of this TRB In-Lap podcast. Obviously, we're going to need a word that the followers need to comment, the listeners need to comment down below at this point in the event. And I feel like maybe we should go for quite a nice one. I feel like just something about Ollie Gavin's lovely smile could be quite nice, or something funny like that. Or,
I think so. Or Ollie Gavin's green horse.
Oh, there we go. Perfect. Spot on. Okay.
Because of the earlier story, not because he owns a green horse, by the way. If you somehow skipped that bit or you were sort of distracted.
I was going to say, I'm hoping someone hasn't skipped forwards, got to you saying Ollie Gavin's green horse and thinking I have no idea what's going on and just backed out.
Then gone to Google it and found some very weird results.
Yes, don't do that. By the way, TRB top tip.
If you're going to Google anything, Google Racing Edge, please.
Yes. Yes, very true. So yeah, Ollie Gavin's green horse, comment below if you've made it this far, and obviously give us your thoughts on the podcast up to this point. So where do we want to start, Haf? I feel like maybe a good point to start with is the prologue. I feel like let's start pre-race and we'll get to the race weekend, because I feel like a lot changed between cars rolling out on track for pre-season testing and the checkered flag on Saturday afternoon. I said it in a post a couple of days ago. You only have to have been within 500 miles of the internet to know that there's a lot of commentary going on about the difference and the changes in performance to the hypercars and the Lmp2s, and the stratification, which is the word the WEC and ACO like to use, throwing that one out, getting that one in there early. The difference between the two classes' pace. We saw them a lot closer than I think I was personally expecting. And I think the general feeling is that the gap between the two of them was a lot smaller than we expected coming into this new era. Not saying that the gap was going to be massive, but that it was just potentially smaller than we had just hoped for or expected. In the prologue, we were seeing times that were quick, that we were simply seeing the P2s, I don't want to say walk over the hypercars, but within comfort beat the hypercar lap times. Obviously, testing isn't everything, but that was starting to kick up and swirl up some debate about really what's going on with this new category. Then we got to the point where Toyota was saying they were giving it absolutely everything in the prologue and that BOP needed to be changed. Comments of sandbagging were obviously flying around. I felt like it was quite a messy, testing can often be filled with just general mess and comments and, oh, these cars are quick and ours are slow and whatever. But I felt like this was really strange, is the way I'd put it. Prologue for you, what did you think?
I agree with everything you've said. It was a bit weird, wasn't it? It had a very strange sort of, I hate to use the word vibe, and I've already used the word energy as well.
Oh dear.
So turning into a hipster here.
Stan Twitter from...
But it had a bit of a weird vibe to it, because I really found the coverage quite hard to follow, or lack thereof, basically. Yep. I'm not saying that they need to turn it into F1 testing, where every day is broadcast all 8 hours or whatever it is, 4 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon, like they did at Bahrain this year. That's too much, and it's probably a lot to ask for testing for sports cars. And as much as there would be a lot of people who tuned in, we just wanted something like the test day, where there is, a bit of Radio Le Mans coverage to listen into. It's not a criticism of them. Obviously don't know what's going on behind the scenes there at all, or if they had an offer to do it or whatever. No, in no way a criticism of Radio Le Mans, but you just wanted that. It was missing that sort of, I have the timing screen up and I want to hear someone talking about which cars are on track now, why maybe we haven't seen a representative time from a certain entry, namely the Toyotas, especially across the first day and a half at least. And it did get to the point where you're thinking, okay, is this getting actually legit now? Are Toyota actually struggling this much? And not just Toyota, Alpine were obviously down on pace as well at that point. And then you saw Toyota go for a low fuel run and sort of the last running on the Tuesday afternoon. And you're like, okay, they've got a bit of, they've definitely got more pace than they've been showing, but that's still mightily close between them and LMP2s. I think it was only a matter of a tenth or two still. And then they put in those lap times in qualifying, just thinking the discrepancy there is pretty large. So the sandbagging comments, obviously, in a sense, anyone who'd been commenting that was like, oh, I told you so kind of thing. But, it's hard to know with testing in any category, let alone where BOP is involved at the start of a new era for WEC. what's true and what's not true. And I did really find the lack of coverage quite confusing. I had the timing screen up, as I know you did, because we were chatting about it for a while. We didn't really seem to get many updates. I would have appreciated some sort of like from the people running the accounts for WC. Great that we're seeing the cars on track and the new liveries and shots of Eau Rouge and stuff. And I really love the video of Duncan Vincent trackside at Eau Rouge being like, look at, you feel the wind of the cars rushing through here. Look at the cars bouncing and bottoming out and then go back up the crest. Fantastic. All getting me hyped up. What was missing for me was that we're halfway through the session now. This car's set the fastest time overall, but the number 7 and 8 Toyotas have been doing this, and they've primarily only really completed 4 timed laps or something like that. Just a little bit of an update. And you can argue maybe I need to go and figure that out for myself, but like most people on Monday and Tuesday, we're working. So we didn't have the information to hand as much as we wanted to sort of geek out and look at the timing screens and read into things way too much, as everyone does with testing. It was a bit tricky and just a weird vibe to it, to sum it up.
Then we obviously had the comments post Prologue. We had the talk about how much quicker P2s were in the second sector. We had comments from Toyota about, we promise you we're giving it everything. BOP needs to be adjusted. Then we had the FIA WEC ACO saying, we're not going to change anything. What you've got is what you've got. Then we come into practice and qualifying, and then suddenly there is a bit of a pace difference. And then suddenly we're seeing Toyota are setting, their qualifying laps are, close, but there's a 2-second gap in that lap. Okay, reduced from the 7+ seconds that we saw in LMP1, LMP2 days, but they found that pace at the death. I find it, I don't really know where to start on this as an issue, because for me personally, I knew the hypercars would be slower. We were all aware that they were going to be heavier. We were all aware they were going to be reduced power significantly. Like, we're talking Toyota, the number that they quoted pre-season when they announced the GR010, a 32% reduction in power. I mean, we are seeing cars significantly slower in terms of their performance characteristics, and then they're significantly slower on track, and everyone loses their mind. Now, I don't want to say that there was a problem made of a problem that we all knew existed, but I feel like the reaction to some extent was a bit confusing, because you only had to have seen this hypercar category announced. You only had to have seen all the confusion between Aston Martin and the Valkyrie and Glickenhaus and their SCG 007 and comments about engine this and we weight this and whatever, to know that these cars fundamentally were going to be backing up into the LMP2 category pace. Bottom line, I suppose the issue is just how close they were. And considering that the WEC had backed the P2s up a bit, I feel like maybe there is an issue with timing in terms of bringing these new cars in whilst the P2 category is so strong. I'm not saying that you couldn't have carried on with LMP1 as it was. And to be honest, Toyota, they don't need to be in racing to sell road cars. This is a big thing for them to make a hypercar. They're not a supercar hypercar manufacturer, but they're doing it and they're racing. This confusion and this low-level embarrassment, I think, that's caused by a second category being challenging the fastest cars, hypercars. Like, you can't get quicker than a hypercar. And then to a casual fan or someone who's fairly new to it, to see a car 7 seconds slower than they used to be, and they're the new era, and now the driver who's silver rated is getting a run on the new fastest cars in the world. I don't know. I feel like there's this cloud of confusion around this new category that was very much prominent and observed in this opening race.
Yeah, there is an element of, disappointed but not surprised to it, to an extent. Like, it is what it is. But also, I understand why people are confused by it. I understand why people don't understand it. I don't understand why people are so outraged by it. Like you said, we knew this was going to happen for a very, very long time. And the state of LMP1 was something that they couldn't continue, as you rightly say. I guess it's a similar thing to what F1 faced when it switched to hybrids, and the cars were still fairly slow, but they were quiet. And then everyone was like, let's speed them up. Let's, get them breaking like lap records again. So like Schumacher's 2004 laps won't stand anymore. And now we've got to that pace in F1, and we're like, oh, amazing to watch the pole laps back, because they look like they are hypercars basically on rails with stupid amounts of grip. And then everyone's like, oh, the racing's so bad. So as long as we have good racing, like I said with the Lmp2 category, I really don't mind the cars being much slower. I mean, you think about how much you're actually going to miss as a fan in terms of the speed. Yeah, amazing to see lap records getting broken at Le Mans and things like that. And actually another claim to fame that we have is we were there when that 2017 Toyota lap was set. And thankfully it didn't get broken last year, although very nearly did. But we can still say that we were there for that. And amazing to see that that category and how fast it was. And we had Porsche there that year, and it was a great final battle for that sort of end of an era of the peak of LMP1H, where we had Audi, Toyota and Porsche battling hammer and tong and being strong in different parts of the track, like you say. But that couldn't continue. And I don't think anyone was really like, as soon as Porsche left, it wasn't, but Toyota's still so fast. This is great. Look how quick they are. They're still amazing. They've got all this power. And the hybrid
1,000 horsepower. Wow.
Yeah,
that didn't happen.
Exactly. You're like, well, who are they battling with? And now they're so fast that the privateers don't have a chance to mix it in with them. So what am I trying to watch here? And then they got slowed down, and then Rebellion win races, and then it's like they're only winning races because of the BOP. So speed isn't everything. That's my point. I've gone off on a very long-winded tangent there, but that got there in the end, folks. But yeah, I that's how I feel about it. Similar to the P2 category. Yes, it's been slowed down. Yes, the cars aren't running as much power as the Gibson V8 could run. Yes, they're not as quick through the corners because one, they've got more weight, and two, they're running the Le Mans Aero at every track this year.
Yeah, it's not even Le Mans Aero, is it? It's just the Aero. Point blank. Yeah. This is the Aero package they have to run.
Yeah.
I was going to interject and pose you this question. Obviously, cost cutting. Obviously, it's trying to reduce how many millions of dollars millions of euros, whatever, need to be thrown at one of these cars to make it. Do you think, though, that there is this development race, or this, this trying to beat your competitors by making the best possible car? Do you think that competition is dampened somewhat with this new category? Because I was dwelling this in my head, and I didn't ask you about this before because I wanted to put you on the spot. But
thank you.
With the homologation rules, with it being set to 5 years, with you having one aero package, do you think that part of that, like I say, development race, part of that finding the tenths here and there in some sort of breakthrough, is that problematic that that's not there? Or do you think that fundamentally it's a good thing that I've got a wind tunnel that I can use as and when I want, and I can beat you in aero development, is going to, level the playing field?
Oh, this is such a tricky question to answer, because I'm like, yeah, but no, but also yeah, but also no. Look, you're going to have a whole ton of new fans there at Le Mans 2023, and that's fantastic. And the manufacturers that we're bringing back to sports car racing wouldn't be there if the rule sets that have been set out were different, and they were, you build the fastest car you can spend as much money as you want, you can put as many hours in the wind tunnel as you want behind it. That wouldn't happen because the cost would be astronomical. And we were at a point a couple of years ago where we were worried that sports car racing was it. Were we going to have another era as good as what we had in LMP1Hs, or were we going to have another Group C sort of era of the boom of sports cars? And we're all worried about that. And now we seem to have that. And I do fundamentally believe that's because the cars will be balanced to an extent with the LMHs versus LMDHs. The reason GT3 has been such a success, like it or loathe it, and I don't know how you can loathe it because they've put on some incredible racing over the last 10 years or so. But still, if you're not a fan of BOP and you think, oh, that car only won because of balanced performance, well, if the balanced performance wasn't there, they wouldn't be battling against 9 other manufacturers or however many it is in GT3 and different races across the globe. So I do fundamentally back the rule set and the BOP because it attracts the grids that we're going to see and that we're all so excited about. The difficulty of that is you attract a whole load of new fans to watch Le Mans 2022, 2023, and hopefully for many years beyond that. And a lot of them will be like, well, hang on, why can't Ferrari just upgrade their car if they're struggling so much at Le Mans or whatever? I'm not manifesting that Ferrari are going to be bad, obviously, but you know what I mean? A lot of people would be there to watch them to see how they're getting on and things like that. And also, how does the BOP political sort of game get played when you've got customer entries in there as well? You can't just have, oh, Porsche are sandbagging, because you might have a customer Porsche who's absolutely flying. And then Penske can't play the games they want to play, or whoever it is. I don't know. So a very tricky question, and one that I really don't feel I can answer at the minute because it is such early days. But what I will say is I don't think we'd be on the verge of this era we're in if we'd left the rules as wide open as we've seen in the past. And with things like GTE, where there's BOP, yes, people lament the fact that the GT1s were such beasts and they were amazingly beautiful cars with loads of power and amazing sort of huge displacement engines, big V12s and V8s. And yes, it is a great era looking back through rose-tinted glasses, but at the time in LMS and stuff, you sometimes had Corvette just competing against themselves in GT1, and we don't want to see grids getting depleted to that level. And yes, we had a very sort of small entry list in the hypercar category on the weekend, but it's in the context of this is the start of a new era. So, you know, maybe it's not electric right now, but it will be. Not electric, that's a bad word. Digging myself a hole here. Yeah. Digging myself a hole.
Exhilarating.
What's your thoughts on it, Tim?
Yeah, okay,
you really put me on the spot there.
I'll bail you out here. Look, to me, I love that aspect of racing, which is I have fundamentally, down to the nuts and bolts, I have built a better car than you. That is what racing is about. It is about, okay, you got me in the straight lines. Okay, so I need to tune this car now to have better at the top end of its rev range. Oh, you guys are quicker out the corners because your turbo responds to whatever. I need to go and make sure, oh, I might whack a turbocharger on my engine. You know, I like that. I like that essence of development. It's just exciting, isn't it? I mean, homologation specials, whatever, you know, it's cool to think that how far Browns will go just to kick the living daylights out of the garage next door. But, and it's a but that I'll put in bold, italics and underline it, it's expensive. And it's too expensive. That's the problem. It is far too expensive to have a category where there are freedoms. And I think we need to remember that. And I'm going to use the hashtag that we threw around before, the hashtag the greater grid, because get that one in there. We'll get a t-shirt printed, I promise. We've got to start thinking that, okay, it looks funny. A P2 car is challenging a hypercar into Lake Com. Okay, it looks a bit funny. A P2 car might have just gone round the outside of a hypercar in a slightly more downforce dependent sector. You know, okay, it's confusing, but in 2 or 3 years' time, I promise you that 3 laps in practice at the 6 Hours of Spa 2021 will not even cross your mind when you're seeing Porsche, Audi, Peugeot, Ferrari, Toyota, Glickenhaus trying to kick each other's teeth in at Le Mans. I get the issue and I get the embarrassment. And it was so obvious from, you know, we laughed about it at the WEC Twitter, fastest cars in class, not wanting to shine the spotlight on the fact that a P2 was quicker than this golden child of the ACO and WEC. I think we need to think 2 years down the line. It's brand new. Nothing is perfect at the start. We've got 2 hypercars built for hypercar racing against a slowed down LMP1. That's confusing. We've got P2s from a generation of P2s that won't be around in 2 years' time when the new chassis rules come into play and they form the basis of LMDH. We're just in this crossover period that causes a bit of awkward racing. And I'm not going to lie, kind of looking forward to it, because if a P2 wins at Le Mans this year, it could be very exciting. And they might be able to win it on pace alone and not on, if a hypercar has a problem. I'm all up for that. To drop the news that broke literally an hour before we started recording this. Penske and Porsche. The Penske Porsche RS Spider able to cause Audi's LMP1 headaches. No one looks back at that and goes, that's a bit confusing that a P2 won. Everyone's like, oh, wow, that car in the DHL livery, it's iconic. You were just in this little segment period between the end of one regulations and one era LMP1. Okay, yeah, it was quicker, but whatever. And the start of this next one, which is going to be interesting. And I thought a comment actually on a post that summed it up perfectly, which was my pole lap comparison from Frederick Herrigots, which is a photographer. He does WEC shooting. He said, if it benefits the racing, I can live with it. And I think that is the exact same sentiment we should all take away, because fundamentally, if the racing is going to be as good as we think it can be, I don't care that it's 5 seconds slower somewhere. There we go. Do I drop the mic now, or?
Yeah, I think you could drop the mic. You did a far better job of actually answering the question than I did. But we're on the same page. That's the thing. I do get it. I will miss the whole, Toyota and Audi have brought, they're running, one of the cars is running the Le Mans era and the other two are running the high downforce, and there's a big offset between the sectors. And I don't know, or Audi seem to be struggling. So does that mean they're going to struggle at Le Mans, or are they going to make updates before then really into the test day and all the upgrades and development races that we've been so used to seeing in F1 and in the sort of LMP1H era? Yes, we will miss that, and we will miss the fundamental essence of racing. Like you say, the fastest car wins. Whoever's built the best car wins. You can't have any complaints about they have an advantage about this. No, they just fair and square beat the competition. Fair enough. And I'm sure there will be fans of a particular team or a particular driver lineup who say, this car only won because their BOP for this team was rubbish or whatever. But maybe the BOP for that team you're talking about wouldn't even be on the grid if we didn't have some sort of balance in place. And that's just a fact. Racing at this level it's moving to more of that road relevancy that LMP1 was just completely losing. So hopefully it has more of a future. And that's what we've got to think about. And that's why there's been so many eyes on the WEC season openers, because it's in the context of this golden era that we're also patiently, but also sitting around for. Yeah. But just please, can we just fast forward so we can see it now? Because I want to watch these amazing brands go up against each other, all of which have amazing heritage in sports cars as well. Some of the recent brands like Peugeot coming back, obviously, and then we've got the three most winningest brands in Porsche, Audi, and Ferrari coming back as well. So it's going to be amazing. There's no doubts about that. But yes, you have to take it with a pinch of salt sometimes. There will be some BOP gamesmanship going on, just as there was when Ford came back in 2016.
No, just as long as BOP have been 3 letters associated with racing, there has been game surrounding it. That's fact. That's the point, isn't it? But I think your point you say about, we say about aero packages and the high aero and low aero, I think it actually opens up an interesting avenue, because we know that teams will, you would think that teams will prioritize Le Mans. They're going to go, that's the race we want to win in the year. So our setup's going to be low downforce. What is stopping someone from making a slightly higher downforce car and wiping the floor with everyone for 6 of the 7 season races and just sucking up the fact that they struggle at the double points race at Le Mans? That's another way of looking at it. You could get someone who decides to find a medium, or try and find slightly towards the more higher downforce end of the spectrum. Everyone wants to win Le Mans. I get it. But there is an avenue potentially for someone, if they fundamentally want to win a championship and a world championship, and have customers win, say you were a brand and you showed up with a car slightly higher downforce, you're going to do better at Bahrain, you're going to do better at Portimao, you're going to be all right at Fuji, you'll just suck it up down the long straights, whatever the other tracks. We nearly went to Kyalami, Silverstone, if that came back. And you won, your factory car won, and then you had 3 customer entries, rounding out the podium and places beyond, and kicked your competition down the order. It's just like there are races to be won there. I think there's some interesting storylines that could develop. You could get a team that are great across the regular season, I say, being the races that aren't Le Mans, and cars that are particularly good at Le Mans. I don't know. I think there is opportunity for some interesting stuff there. And just to follow up on your Bop comment as well, I had a comment from someone called Jonas_KFM talking about the grandfathered LMP1 car, and my comment saying that I thought it was a bit of a limiting factor. And he says that less weight, less power restriction, and there you go, that would solve the problem. So as much as I'd love to see the hypercars pick up pace in the upcoming years, it's hard to be that optimistic for me. I said this because I see this comment because I said that I think that these hypercars will get a little bit faster. And I say that in retrospect and with thinking about BOP. Fundamentally, BOP is not stationary. It is an ongoing project. It is something that changes week by week, race by race, season by season. Even between qualifying and race sessions, BOP can change. Porsche 2020 at Le Mans, GT team.
Aston 2019.
Aston Martin 2019. It changes fundamentally. At the moment, the only measuring stick for the GRO 10s is against a car that is slowed from a category that doesn't exist. The Alpine is not built to race in hypercar. GRO 10s are. Now you've got to balance those. I feel like the Bop we have now is not going to be the Bop we're stuck with in 2-3 years' time. I feel like if Glickenhaus were there would be something different. I feel like once Glickenhaus are there, things will change. I feel like once we've got other brands beginning to show up with cars, we'll see the Bop change. You only have to look, I think it was a Sebring 2018 when we had IMSA and WEC racing at the same track. The GTLM cars in IMSA, so the Ford GT, your BMW M8s, your Porsche RSRs, were faster across the lap easily. I mean, we're talking a second, maybe 2 seconds, faster than the Gte Pro cars. The same cars, by the way. These are exactly the same cars, just running 2 different championships. So much so, the Bop was so different that a Ford GT in the hands of the IMSA team was 2 seconds faster than the Ford GT in the Chip Ganassi UK team's hands. Bop changes. Bop moves around. The cars are going to be 5 seconds slower at Le Mans. It might be 5 seconds slower this year. It might be 7 seconds slower this year. We might all be going 10 seconds slower at Le Mans in a year. How has that happened? But I reckon in 2-3 years' time, we'll see the gap close slightly. We'll see things change. It's just the nature of BOP. We might come back to Spa next year and the cars are suddenly 3 seconds a lap faster than they were the previous time. I think it's going to change. I don't think it will stay the same. I don't think we'll have this same performance level. Obviously, it's not going to move massively. It's not going to suddenly be back at LMP1 hybrid pace. But I think it will change. And I think we're just seeing the first step into this new era. And they've got to be tentative about it. They've got to just make sure they get things, they're going to make mistakes, can't do everything perfect. Give it a little bit of time, let them work things out, let things come and go, particularly once this Alpine's gone, because I do think that causes a bit of a headache in terms of backing that car up. And I think we'll see some of the pace deficit recovered. Yes. Any points from you? Deep breath? Any more you want to raise on that point?
Final point is BOP gets a bad rep because every driver, like you say, will bring it up straight away when they get out of the car if they've had a bad stint, or even if they've had a good stint, they'd say, that was good, we did what we needed to do. But those Ferraris, they're BOP, man. It's unfair. Like, they're catching us so much on this part of the track or whatever. So like you said, you never hear a driver or team say anything good about their BOP, because they don't want to get pegged back. They want to get more BOP breaks. So it's inherently always going to get a bad rep from people who are running the cars, from people who are driving the cars themselves. And that does give it the narrative of being a negative thing, when, like we've said multiple times now, the reality is without it, we wouldn't have sports car racing as we know it anymore. And we've seen that it works. Yes, it does hamper cars, and I do really hate to see cars that get a good pole position at Le Mans or whatever track, but particularly at Le Mans, like we saw last year with the Porsche on pole position, like you just said with the Aston in 2019, and then getting slammed with a BOP thing, which might be a relatively small change. But when the teams have been working from test day all through Le Mans week for the hours of practice they get, at least in 2019, to nail the setup, changing the ride height the night before the race is not going to help at all. And we've seen cars plummet back. That needs to stop. That fundamentally, even if a car has got an advantage, you need to be like, okay, but they've still got to win Le Mans, just as Toyota still had to win Le Mans with barely any competition the last few years. You can say, yes, they weren't challenged by it, but they still went and won Le Mans. They could have easily bottled it, like we've seen in many years before. Things can and very often do go wrong, especially at races like Le Mans. So yeah, yes, it's going to get a bad rep. Yes, it's going to be an issue, but the policing of it will be crucial in my eyes, because if we see a Porsche get pole position or an Audi get pole position in 2023 at Le Mans, and then has an overnight BOP change and plummets back, well, I think that would be a tragedy, because we want to see, as much as we don't want to see one car have a clear runaway advantage, we also don't want to see a car just being hampered so much that they've been taken out of the game because they didn't play the BOP game to start with. So yes, it's a negative in that sense, but it's positive because we wouldn't even be talking about it, because we wouldn't have such a good top class as we're going to have in the next few years. What I will say, transitioning to the race now.
Yeah, I was going to say, should we talk about
quite
the actual,
enough? Yeah,
talk about the actual race we had?
Probably quite enough chat about that, but it is clearly a topic that we're passionate about, and so many other sports car fans are passionate about. But like you say, it's very, very early days. And for what we have now, I thought it was a pretty cracking race, to be fair. We only had 3 cars on the entry list, 2 Toyotas, obviously, and the one grandfathered Lmp1 machine from Alpine, which is essentially a rebranded Rebellion R13.
Which is a rebranded Orica.
Yeah. Which is a rebranded. The list goes on.
Yeah.
All jokes aside, it was actually a very good race. A nice strategic fight, and proving that you don't need to have wheel-to-wheel battles every lap, don't need to have side-by-side Eau Rouge every single lap to be an exciting race. Yes, obviously it helps, but for people like you especially, who seem to be completely clued up and have the engineering brain to be able to understand, oh, they're doing that, so split second later that will help them later in the race because they don't have to do this, which is why I very much enjoy watching races with you, especially when we're trackside, because I'm like, that car sounds really cool, that livery is really cool, this car spits flames when it goes down from third gear to second gear, and you're like, yeah, but they're on a different strategy and this guy's off sequence, so just watch them come through before the end of the lap. Or we're standing at the final chicane, you're like, that car's going to box now, and it does, and I'm like, how do you know that? How do you know that? So yeah, it was a good strategic race, wasn't it? And for what we have now, yes, like you said, the Alpine's causing a bit of a headache BOP wise, but for what we have now in the entry list and what we have potentially on the table for the rest of the year, it was a promising start, I think, because as much as Hansen was keeping the Alpine at bay once it was in free air, I actually thought it was a great performance from Andre Negrão, who managed to bring the gap down, and then when he handed over to Lapierre was really able to push.
Lapierre does what Lapierre always does, which is just wring the neck of whatever machine he's in. I
would say he was my driver of the category, but I actually think because he sort of shot himself in the foot by being that good that we just expect that performance of him now. And I'd say Negrão really impressed me because he's still getting up to speed in this car, and obviously Alpine is still getting up to speed with this car, because while yes, you'd rather have a faster car that's been pegged back as a platform rather than a slower car that's been brought forward, because you have the sort of like we said before, that Gibson engine's very reliable, the aero package is good. Yes, they've got less weight, more weight and stuff for which is hampering them. And of course, we've seen that with the Lmp2s being able to keep up with them. And it's a lot more difficult now, but even for a hypercar to pass with a hybrid system. They're not blasting past on the straights like we're used to. They're sort of creeping up to them, having to make a very deliberate move to the inside or flash the lights just to make sure that they have been seen or whatever it is. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty cracking race and managed to keep us for a 3-car entry list. It managed to keep us guessing until at least the final hour. And then we thought, okay, this is settled now.
Probably the final 20 minutes, really, until Alpine had to make that stop with the puncture that cost them time on that lap in. Obviously, they were due to stop around kind of in a 5-lap window there anyway. It had that typical sports car battle of this car's quicker but can't go as long on its stint, or this car is slightly slower but it can do 10 minutes more. You know, it had that interest because the Alpine was fundamentally a very quick car over the race weekend. Okay, it wasn't particularly good in qualifying, but what does qualifying mean in a 6-hour race? You know, and that car was there. It led convincingly. It led at a handful of occasions when pit stop windows were playing out. I think that was an interesting battle that really did come down to the last, like you say, last hour, the last couple of stints. If that is what we get for the rest of the season, I'm not complaining at all, because I think Alpine are within a shot of winning a race outright, deservedly. You know, because if we were looking at the Toyota performances, I would say that number 7 car was quicker. I felt like the number 7 was the better car following on from pole. Then we had that weird change of position about 20 minutes in, because Toyota is as Toyota does, which is we need to swap the cars round. If someone wants to send me a postcard as to why that happened. I know Buemi was apparently faster, but Conway then kept on the back of him for the rest
Hardly
of the
all over the back of him, was he?
He was like nearly 2 seconds down.
Yeah, and we didn't really see the usual complaining over the radio from Buemi being like he needs to speed up. And it's not like Buemi was massively under pressure from Alpine. Yes, they were still thereabouts a few.
Sorry, in the first 20 minutes of the race, though.
Yeah,
everyone's going to be close.
That was bizarre. That really was bizarre. And fair play to Conway for, one, just being a team player and getting on with it, and 2, then proving the point. Actually, he's not dropping me in the slightest. So, you know, and he didn't complain about it after either. He just said, I don't know, maybe the team wants to try something, but I didn't feel like he was that much quicker. Like, you know, fair enough.
But as I was saying, I feel like the 7 car was quicker, but they had all of those problems with the front locking. We obviously saw Kobayashi in the wall at Bruxelles in the final 2 hours. So again, and the car then stopped in the run up to Les Combes. It was then stopped. The car's just cut out. That car didn't have an easy run. Typical new car teething problems. Again, nothing to just be like, oh, these cars are rubbish. It's just a new car problem. The number 8 really only won because it didn't have problems. I honestly didn't feel like that car was particularly spectacular. And the Alpine was well within a chance of pipping it in the final hour. And if so, the only reason it was restricted was this stint length problem, where the Alpine, we heard from Philippe Signot, who's the man of Senior Tech who run the team, they categorically can't get any more fuel in that fuel tank. They cannot pump more petrol into that car if they tried. And so we're seeing this 2-3 lap difference at somewhere like Spa. We're hoping that we don't see a painful difference at Le Mans, like 2 laps, say. I just think that car was there, and it was an interesting race. And really, the 7's problems stopped it from being a 3-car fight right the way down to the checkered flag.
Yeah, definitely. It was a good race, wasn't it? Really, all in all, it was a really good race. I do agree with you that, again, how many times have we said the 7 probably deserved to win on pace alone, and have been sort of unlucky or have had issues. We've seen teething problems with new cars in the past, even when we'd have the opener at Silverstone. And I remember we were discussing in the race, Audi's having similar braking issues. I think it was either 2015 or 2016, where they'd lock up and run on, and the drivers would be like, well, it was weird because I couldn't unlock the brake. And maybe it's the extra weight of the Toyota straining the brakes more. Maybe it's teething issues with the way they're recouping energy for the hybrid. It's all things to be expected. And I'm surprised we didn't see more stoppages or more sort of cutouts like the 7 had in the last sort of hour or so. But it was able to continue on its merry way pretty well. And even though Kobayashi must have had some pretty big flat spots, was able to keep the Alpine at bay still for a little while. But yeah, I thought it was a good race. I was encouraged by Alpine's pace. Obviously, yes, I know there's a lot of BOP at play there to balance the two cars because they're very, very different machines. But they seem to be, have strengths and weaknesses. And I do worry, like you said, at Le Mans, will we see that fuel deficit just mean that they're not a factor? Because if they're having to box 10 minutes or so early or make it another stop in a 6-hour race, is that going to be 4 times as bad at Le Mans? Maybe we'll have to wait and see. But it does, the fact that Alpine are in the mix, and they'll probably have quite a good chance because they'll have a chance to have got up to speed against Glickenhaus, etc., is important in the context of Alpine's rebranding and in the context of the entire Renault group sort of overseeing everything. If they'd completely said, nah, Alpine, you're not having any performance because hypercars are our golden child and you don't want to enter a hypercar right now, so you can get screwed if you think that you're going to have any sort of lap time advantage or anything. I think it's good that they're in the mix and they do have a chance to split the Toyotas like we saw, or maybe score a pole position, or maybe even take a surprise win down the line. It's not beyond the realms of possibility this season. And I think that's important because we would quite like to see Alpine make it LMDH or hypercar entry as well. So,
Please.
Yeah, as good as that car looks in F1 livery, we just need to see it in a hypercar LMDH livery, because that would just be incredible. I mean, me and you have stanned that car hard ever since it was the Orica 03 with the open top cockpit dating back to sort of 2014, 15. So yeah, we'd love to see that. Yeah, such a cool color scheme, such a cool brand with great history at Le Mans, of course. It's won overall, I think it was 74. So yeah, one of those things where you're like, cool, let's have them having some more, even if they don't get the wins or results in the end. The fact that they're featuring and the fact that they're giving Toyota a run for their money is important in the context of what's to come for that brand in the future, I think.
So why don't we round off this episode, which has seen us probably rant for a lot longer than people would have expected, and there's probably been much less coverage of the actual race and more coverage over 3 letters being BOP, with driver of the race and your team of the race. For me, if I was to go first, I think my team of the race would be TF Sport. Incredibly impressed by those guys with the Aston Martins. I say Aston Martins with an S on the end because they're running the D station entry as well. Had the problems in the prologue, rebuilding cars, got their ELMS chassis there, which is then the race car for the number 33. I think that's really impressive to see that squad get doing really well, and deservedly so. And I'm excited to see where TF Sport go from here, because as we discussed earlier, and obviously now they're running a P2 car in the form of the Team Turkey ELMS entry, and now they've got 2 GTE Aston Martins, being the TF Sport 33 and the D Station 777 car. Then if I was to say my driver, do I give it to Kevin Estre? It's easy to. It would be very easy to give it to him. I want to give it to him. I think I'd be lying if I didn't give it to him. I feel like my honorary vote goes to Ollie Gavin, just because that's my honorary vote for driver of the day. I just categorically, as a Porsche fan, as a Kevin Estre fan, that was Kevin Estre's absolute best and what we've come to know and love from him. So he gets my vote for driver of the day. Half yours, go, driver and team.
You've stolen quite a lot of mine, to be honest.
Really?
I was also going to go with TF Sport in AM. So maybe I'll do the driver of that class driver overall has been taken. I was going to say Estre. I've obviously, actually, you know what? I'll stick to my guns from earlier on. I want to give an honourable mention to Tomo Fuji, because I thought that was a cracking drive in the opening stint to come from very, very far down the GT AM order and be following through Matty Campbell basically, and then challenging right up the front at the end of it, and that's amazing to see. And again, obviously a little shout out to TF Sport who are running that car. But yeah, I'm going to stick with Phil Hansen as driver, because I thought that first stint was just unbelievable. I don't think I've seen a performance like that in LMP2 for a very long time, where a driver has just streaked away out the front. And we know how good of a team United Autosports is. We know how strong the driver lineup is, but it's hardly like he was struggling for competition there. He was so far up the road in some points in that stint, and keeping the Alpine behind and keeping the Toyotas honest in the opening laps, not just when he managed to get past on the opening lap, because maybe that was to be expected while they're still taking it easy and getting up to speed, etc. But to be there pretty much on pace and be the P2, which is really taking it to the hypercars as we expected to see early in the race, that was really cool. In terms of team, hard not to choose TF Sport as well. I'm going to go with Alpine because I was very happy to see that they were up there. It's a new car for them. Yes, it's a proven car in many senses, but there's been some pretty drastic changes to that car. And while we're waiting for this golden era to get going, we need someone like Alpine to be up there, so we have something to cheer on and something to sort of an underdog to fight for, because how much do we all love an underdog in endurance racing? Like you said earlier on, those surprise results with LMP2s being closer to hypercars. Maybe we'll see a repeat of the 2017 race where an LMP2 nearly won overall. Or people remember races like Petit Le Mans 2015 because of the sort of sprung up surprise results that no one really saw coming going into it. That's what everyone talks about and remembers. And yes, it's not what the ACO want at all, because they want their top class to be winning and stuff. But that's why it's so much of a,
they'll have their time. They'll have their time. Hypercars will have their moment. If a P2 wins overall, we should just enjoy it.
Exactly. So Alpine get my vote, because I was happy to see how they didn't need too much time to get up to speed, and they didn't seem to be completely driving the wheels off it to be rattling the Toyotas or trying to go for headline times in qualifying and stuff. They were just quietly getting on with their program. We'll push these tires now. We know we can go like long on these tires and we can push to the end of the stint, or let's turn up the engine map now because we need to be a bit more aggressive. Just doing their thing, and that provided us with a really good race. So grateful to them for that. But so many good performances individually in drivers, and so many teams that deserve big shout outs. So I think we've covered quite a lot of them there by sort of copping out with
for you
I was going to choose this,
answer,
but I was going to choose that, but also honourable mention to this, and but
everyone,
us, isn't it?
Everyone who drove, everyone gets a medal.
Everyone who took part deserves a medal.
You get a TRB. You get a TRB driver of the day. You get a TRB driver. Well, that pretty much concludes everything here on this episode of the TRB In-Lap Podcast. Obviously, the endurance racing season in terms of top flight stuff, if you like IMSA and WEC, is really kicking off now. We're about to head into a very busy period. We're going to see some episodes will combine a few of the IMSA sprint races. There will be dedicated episodes to the WEC rounds as well. So there will be a round for the next WEC race, which is the 8 Hours of Portimao on the 13th of June. I'm very much looking forward to that one and seeing the next episode of LMP2 versus Hypercar versus Bot versus Sandbagging versus the general opinion of everyone watching on. Thank you very much, Mike, for joining me for another episode of this, and thank you everyone for listening this far if you've made it. Remember Ollie Gavin's green horse if you have made it this far. Let us know your comments on the podcast. Let us know your comments on the race, your driver of the day, your team of the day. Any closing comments from yourself, Huff?
No, thanks for having me back on, and thanks again to Racing Edge for being legends. And I'm excited to do the rest of the season, because we're already going off on massive tangents and rambling about everything because it's exciting. That's why, not because we're idiots or anything and can't string a sentence together, in my case at least. But no, thanks for having me again, and look forward to being back soon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much to everyone for listening. This has been the 6 Hours Spa 2021 TRB In-Lap podcast presented by Racing Edge. I look forward to seeing you all next time. Goodbye.